Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Chris. What an incredible honor to have the chance to be here with you today, to talk with this very large room full of people who all share a sense of the importance of education and the difficulty of getting a real education system to work, with all the political pressures, with all the difficulties. And then suddenly, in the last few years, let me guess, it's gotten harder, right? That's what we're going to talk about today. What is happening? Why is it getting harder? What is this? What is happening as Gen Z comes in and the millennials have left? Now, whenever anyone starts to talk with what's going wrong with those young people, what's going wrong with this generation, you should be a little bit skeptical because people have been asking this question for thousands of years, what's wrong with them? So the Roman poet Horace wrote, worse than our grandparents' generation, our parents then produced us even worse, and soon to bear still more sinful children. So there's always been a sense that the next generation is miserable, failures, but it's usually actually moral decay. And that's not the issue with Gen Z. We don't think that Gen Z is morally bad. It's something else. Raise your hand if you have noticed, beginning sometime between 2010 and 2015, or raise your hand if you've noticed a rise of depression, anxiety, fragility. Have you seen that in Gen Z? That's our starting point today. So I need to convince you that what's going on now is not just the usual misunderstanding of each generation for the one after. I need to show you as a social scientist that there really is something very serious happening, which has enormous implications for everybody in education, and then as this generation moves out, for everybody in, business, politics, and every other institution in life. So let's begin. What is going on? What are the facts? Adolescence in America began changing a number of years ago. This is nationally representative data from 12th graders showing how they use their time. What this shows is the percentage of 12th graders from 1976 through 2016, the percent who have a driver's license. Now, when I graduated from high school in 1981, we all got our driver's license on our 16th birthday, unless it was a Sunday, and then you'd wait until Monday. But you would never wait till Tuesday. But now many students are just not even bothering to get a driver's license. Now, granted, there's Uber and things like that, but it's also in part that they don't really need to drive because they're not going out very much. The percentage who have ever gone out drinking, the percentage who have ever gone out on a date, the percentage who have ever worked for pay is plummeting. These are some of the main landmarks that we expect as adolescents develop, move away from their parents, take risks, define their identity. We kind of expect at universities, that the freshmen coming in have done all these things. And that's not true anymore. They haven't. Now, you might just say, okay, fine, they're different. They're just spending a lot more time on their beds looking at their devices. What's wrong with that? Well, that's not the only difference. So when the millennials were college, now this is nationally representative data from American college students looking at first-year freshmen, and what we see is that when the millennials were the students, levels of learning disabilities, other problems were at 3 to 5%. And as the millennials leave and Gen Z comes in, look what rises. It's overwhelmingly psychological disorders that have skyrocketed just in the couple of years when we had the changing of the generations. Now, it's not all psychological disorders. We're flooded by students coming in only for depression and anxiety. That's all that's rising. So when millennials, this is now not college students, this is all American teens. And when the millennials were the teenagers, these were the rates of major depression for boys and for girls. Those rates diverge at puberty. Girls have higher rates of depression and anxiety beginning at puberty. But look what happens when Gen Z comes into the data set. The boys go up, the girls go way up. Looking at college student data, same pattern. When the millennials were the students, those rates were stable. When Gen Z comes into the picture, the boys go up, the girls go way up. Now, it's not just depression, it's also anxiety. There's been a lot of discussion over the last 5 years. What is happening? What is happening to our kids? And there have been some people who quite reasonably express skepticism, like Dr. Richard Friedman, writing in the New York Times, who says, nothing's happening. All that's happening is that Gen Z is really comfortable talking about depression and anxiety. That's a good thing. But there's no underlying problem, he said. A very reasonable hypothesis, but I believe it's wrong for 3 reasons. First, this is data from what students report. Why did they go to the Student Health Center? And as you see, it's only depression and anxiety that are rising. Nothing else is rising. So it's not that they're hypochondriacs. It's not that they're happy to talk about everything. It's a specific change, just depression and anxiety. And note, they don't even claim to be more stressed. The difference is that Gen Z has no more stress than the millennials did, but we never gave them the chance to learn how to deal with ordinary life stress. You also, here's the second reason I think Friedman is wrong. You also see it in behavior. So this is the number out of 100,000 American teenage girls, or girls of various ages, who are admitted to hospitals each year because they harmed themselves, mostly cutting themselves, and their parents or somebody brought them to the hospital. And you see, until 2009, there's no real trend in the data. Look what happens after 2009. The rate for the older teen girls goes up 62% in just a few years. This is not self-report. This is not changing diagnostic criteria. This is hospital admissions. Look what happens to the youngest girls, preteen girls. They didn't used to cut themselves, and now they do. Their rate has nearly tripled in just a few years. Now, significantly, the oldest group of women here, the young women here, these are millennials. Even in the latest data point, these are millennials. They don't go up. And that, I think, is very revealing. Something happened to Gen Z that made them vulnerable, fragile, anxious, and self-harming. We also see it in suicide. The suicide rate for boys is higher than girls because boys, they make fewer attempts, but they tend to use guns and tall buildings. They use irreversible means. So boys have a higher rate, but look at the change. When Gen Z comes into the data set, the numbers go up for boys and girls, but the percentage change for girls is, again, astronomical. 150% increase in the suicide rate of preteen girls in just a few years. So just to repeat, boys have problems too. I'm not saying this is just about girls, but the change in girls' lives since 2011 or so is much bigger than the change in boys' lives. A third reason I think that this is real is that it's happening in the same form in Canada. This is UK data, same thing. Boys are up. Boys actually are not really up on self-harm. Girls, the same pattern. Canada, I was just in Australia, New Zealand, same thing, but with a delay. I was in Spain. So this is happening not everywhere necessarily, but in all the English-speaking countries for sure. Now, why? Why would this be happening at the same time in multiple countries with bigger impacts on girls than boys and with the biggest impact on preteen girls? Well, that brings us to part 2 of my talk. I think the only thing that can explain that pattern of changes is the rapid emergence of social media, which transformed teen lives between 2009 and 2011. So look at these data. This is the percentage of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who are using social networking sites almost every day. And to walk it through, in 2006, Facebook opens to all, but very few 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds are on Facebook. In 2007, the iPhone comes out. Very few preteens have an iPhone. It's expensive. 2009 is the key transition year. This is when Facebook adds the like button and Twitter copies it. Twitter adds the retweet button. Facebook copies it. This is when social media becomes really addictive. It becomes everybody is training everybody else with little tiny rewards and punishments. And this is when American teens flood on. So before 2009, they were much more likely to visit each other at home and play after school. After 2011, things have moved online. Now, that box that I showed you, that box here, if we superimpose it on the depression graph, it fits perfectly. I should also note, I have an article in this month's Atlantic pointing out that it was that change, social media changing from 2009 to 2011 and 12, and the adaptation of the news media to those changes that I believe explains why American democracy is going haywire. And not just American, in many parts of the world. We've created an outrage machine. We gave it to the Russians. They started using it in 2014. Back to our main story, though. Social media also perfectly explains the sex difference. Girls use social media a lot more than boys. Boys are spending a lot of their screen time on games, and games are not particularly harmful. Girls are much more affected by social comparison than boys are, especially social comparison of looks, body, beauty image standards, things like that. Girls are more affected by the fear of missing out. Their social life is based more on who's in, who's out, who knows whose secrets, who's excluded. Fourth, girls and boys are equally aggressive, but boys' aggression has always been physical. They would physically threaten each other and sometimes even harm each other. Once they all went online, you can't do that online. You can't punch people online. But girls' aggression is relational. Girls have always harmed other girls by damaging their relationships or reputation. And social media makes it effortless to do it anonymously 24 hours a day. So for all these reasons, when social media came flooding in and transformed teens' social life, girls' mental health plummeted. Now, I need to be clear as a social scientist, this is not settled science. There are other researchers who disagree with me, who say, no, there's no evidence, but here's my read of the debate. There are now 30 or 40 correlational studies I've found, and they very consistently show that moderate use is not associated with problems, but heavy use is. But those correlational studies only explain a small portion of the variance, so the people on the other side are right on that point. However, the experimental studies, and there are 8 or so that I found, 7 of the 8 that I found do show direct causal effects. If you go off social media, your well-being increases. And fourth, something nobody's talking about yet, the basic network effects. Old studies of health effects by Nicholas Christakis. If one person gains weight or takes up smoking, that makes their friends more likely, but also their friends' friends, and also their friends' friends' friends. Basic networking effects are huge, especially for depression. Depression is much more contagious than happiness. And so around 2011, when all teens got hyper-connected, and then we get a flood of depression among the girls. So it all fits. And there it is. But that's only part of the story, social media. There's a lot more going on, and a lot more with very direct relevance to K-12 education. So cause number 2. We have vastly overprotected our kids and thereby harmed them. So I'm drawing here from work that I did with my friend Greg Lukianoff when we wrote our book, The Coddling of the American Mind. I'm so pleased to learn, I think you all got that when you registered. And the book is based around Greg noticing originally that college students around 2015 started acting like they believed 3 really, really bad ideas. These 3 ideas. And if you believe all 3 of these ideas, I cannot guarantee that you will fail in life, but you will generally be weak, fragile, and angry. Now let's take the first one. Obviously, that's the direct opposite of what Friedrich Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And what Nietzsche was getting at was a psychological principle known as anti-fragility. Now, that word is a new word in the English language because Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote The Black Swan, he needed a word to describe systems that need challenge and shock and instability in order to get strong, like the banking system. He's one of the few who called the financial crisis long before it happened. And so he's looking for a word for this property of some systems, and there isn't one, so he makes up the word anti-fragile, the opposite of fragile. If a glass is fragile, so if you knock it over, it'll break, and nothing good happens, so we give our kids plastic cups, right, sippy cups. Because if a kid drops a sippy cup, it doesn't break, but it doesn't get better. It does not improve from being dropped. And so what is it? What makes some things get better by being dropped? So let's look especially, so bones get stronger when they're banged around. If you don't use them, they get weak. If we go to Mars, our bones will get weak. The immune system is the best example. So most of us, when we were kids, we could bring peanut butter sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly to school. Today, many kids can't because peanut allergies are so high. Why are they so high? And why did they only go up in countries in which women are told to avoid peanuts when they're pregnant? So some immunologists and researchers did a very simple study. They recruited women who'd just given birth, and they gave half of them a supply of bamba, which is an Israeli snack. It's like a Cheeto. It's like a puffed corn with peanut dust on it. So it tastes a bit like peanut butter. And a 3-month-old infant can eat it. And then they gave half of them a supply, said, go home, Give your kid some Bamba. In 5 years, if he's still alive, come tell us. They monitored them carefully, and they did all sorts of things. And then the other half followed standard advice. No peanuts for you either, because you, the mother, the proteins will come through your milk. So no peanuts for you. So with standard advice, what happens? At the age of 5, 17% of these kids have a peanut allergy. For the rest of their lives, they have to worry every time they go to a restaurant, every time they eat out. What happened to the kids who were given peanut dust? 3%. We could essentially wipe out peanut allergies by doing the opposite of what we've been doing. We made the mistake of protecting kids' immune systems, which makes them fragile. So this is an example of our subtitle, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. Now, let's rerun. Okay. So let's rerun the same attitude on the entire child. Kids are fragile. Let's protect them. Let's always be there for them. We don't want them to fall down. We don't want them to get lost. That would be very scary. We will always be there for them to help them out. The problem is, if you're always there for them, they never learn to fend for themselves, and then you have to always be there for them, even after they graduate from college. I teach at a business school. I talk to a lot of business people, and I occasionally now hear of people who gave a tough performance review to a young employee, and they heard from the employee's mother. I can prove to you how much American childhood has changed with this simple demonstration. I want you to all think for yourselves, at what age were you let out? At what age could you leave the house, go to a friend's house a quarter mile away, you and your friend decide, should we go to a store, should we go play soccer, what should we do? I don't know. At what age did you have that freedom? If it was first grade, you should say 6. If it was not till you were in 11th grade, you should say 16. So think of your number. Now I'm just gonna, okay, now, only, raise your hand if you were born before 1982. Please raise your hand high. Okay, so you're all Gen X and baby boomers. Just you older folks. I'm gonna, that includes me. Okay, just, did I just microaggress against you? I'm sorry. Okay, so just the older half or third of the room. As I sweep my finger around, just yell out your number. Just yell it out loud. At what age? Okay, so that worked absolutely perfectly. Pretty much everybody was 6 to 8, right? That was the norm. That's what we used to do. And this was during the crime wave. Remember, older folks, we had a gigantic crime wave in this country. And it ended in the mid-90s. It just disappeared in the mid-90s. But we all went out and played. Okay, now, we probably have a few Gen Z. So if you're born in, let's expand it, even 1994. If you're born in 1994 or later, raise your hand. Okay, we have about a dozen, maybe a little more. So you have to, I'm gonna ask you what's your number? And so as I sweep my finger around, but you have to call it out real loud because there's only about 10 of you. Okay, just call it out. Okay, so what I find nationally is this. Now in this group, we did have a couple of 8s and things like that, going to show that if you let your kids out early, they'll do big, bold things like join ExcelinEd. Okay. But I can tell you, I've done this all over the country, and it's the same in Canada, it's the same in Britain, it's even the same in Spain. I was there a few weeks ago. It's been a global thing in developed countries. We have fewer kids, we're more afraid, even though crime is down, we lock them up. And this, I believe, has had enormously terrible effects. Lenore Skenazy wrote this wonderful book, Free Range Kids. She says we need to rewrite our children's stories for the age of safetyism and overprotection. We need books like, Oh, the Places You Won't Go, The Playdates of Huckleberry Finn, Harold and the Purple Sofa, Encyclopedia Brown Solves the Worksheet, and Dora in the Ford Explorer. On a more serious note, all mammals play a lot. They need it to wire up their brains. What happens when we deprive kids of free play, unsupervised free play? What happens? According to Peter Gray, these are all the things kids learn in play, the essential skills for life in a democracy, life in an office, life with people. These are the essential skills. We cultivate them in play. And when we deprive our kids of play, we deprive them of these skills. One I want to particularly call to your attention as people involved in education is risk perception. Risk perception is risk handling is extremely important. Alison Gopnik, developmental psychologist, wrote this great essay, and she noted that when we try to remove risk from kids' lives, it actually is like trying to remove dirt and germs. It actually, like the peanut thing, it actually might weaken them. And she says, in the same way, by shielding children from every possible risk, we may lead them to react with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't risky at all. And in so doing, we isolate them from the adult skills that they will one day have to master. So this, I think, is what we've done to our kids. This is, I think, what we've done to Gen Z that has led to, this is one of the two major causes, that has led to this surge of depression, anxiety, and fragility. We didn't let them learn how to deal with threats, challenges, problems, and setbacks. So I'm not saying we need to go back to this. Okay? So Nietzsche did not say what kills you makes you stronger, because that's just obviously not true. So we don't want playgrounds where kids can die. But I think this is exactly right, because on this kind of playground, you can get hurt. And most of us who are older remember the monkey bars. You can get hurt on the monkey bars. And the seesaw, you have to work it out. Is he gonna get off and make me drop? You gotta work that out. A lot of you are holding your butts right now, right? You remember that feeling. But you learned in the negotiation. And this is crucial. If you can get hurt on the playground, then every day you're learning how to not get hurt. But if you were raised on this kind of playground, like my kids, you don't get to learn how to not get hurt. So the dictum, the motto, our slogan should be, prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. All right, so I've told you there is a crisis. I've shown you data saying Gen Z is in big trouble. I've explained two of the major causes. There are others, but I think these are the big two. What can we do? What do we do? I think we can educate for wisdom, strength, and independence. Of course, we all want to. You're all doing this in your own ways. But I'm going to give you some specific advice, 6 specific suggestions that I think will work and that will be powerful, especially if we do them all together. First, I want to make a general point that something really big has changed with enormous ramifications, which is, look at it this way. There's a river of information coming into all of our eyes and ears. And if we look at our kids, think about the river of information coming in. What's coming in? What's coming in? Billions of bytes of data coming in. Now, if we go back to, say, the 1890s, just pick any time, let's divide up this river into 3 substreams. How much information is coming in that was created within a week, within the last week? That's one stream. Another stream is stuff that was created 10 to 50 years ago by the parents' or grandparents' generation. Another stream is stuff that was more than 100 years old. The Bible, Shakespeare, the classics. Now, I have no idea what the numbers are, what the ratios are. I just drew those 3 lines as being equal in width. That's arbitrary. What we want to do is think, how has it changed in the last 100 or so years? Well, if we go to, say, the 1960s, we have a technology revolution, media revolution. So TV is going to bring a lot more new stuff in. And there could be a drop in the older stuff. But note that TV was something that we often did as a family. And also note who was making the TV programs, not other 12-year-olds. And so those of us growing up in the 50s, in the 60s and 70s, I feel like I kind of had a sense of like what life was like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s from watching TV shows from previous generations. But what happens now? When we go to the 2010s, what happens? Now, I suspect the majority of everything coming in through their eyes and ears is less than a week old, coming in from their parents. We have hyper-connected Gen Z to themselves, which leaves very little room for anybody else. And if you see that older information is declining and very old information might be nearly gone, well, now we're in a very interesting and I think perilous situation, which is basically what Edmund Burke feared. Edmund Burke, writing about the French Revolution and the French tendency to sort of burn down the past and invent new things, Burke says, we, meaning we British, he says, we are afraid to put men to live in trade, each on his own private stock of reason, because we suspect that this stock in each man is small, and that the individuals would do better to avail themselves of the general bank and capital of nations and ages. What Burke was afraid of is that if you cut yourself off from the past, you cannot make it in this world. You can't reinvent everything right away. It just is not going to work. And I think Gen Z might be the first generation in human history that is cut off from all that we've learned in humanity. Now, if that is true, now obviously they have access to all sorts of stuff, and I don't want to say they're cut off, but as a relative thing, there's not much room left for what the teacher is saying or what the parents are saying. There's just not much room left in the input stream. And if that's true, then I think we all need to think about how do we educate for wisdom? And I would suggest two things. First, for God's sakes, ban devices during the day. So having a smartphone is very valuable for getting to school and arranging pickup, but there's got to be a way. Look, the kids most of them are addicted to their devices. They're on it all the time. A lot of them wish they weren't addicted. At least give them 7 hours of practice not being on their phone. And if you don't take it away and put it in a locker, they're going to be checking in the bathroom, they're going to be checking between periods, and they're not going to play at recess. So for God's sakes, make that a clear rule. Now again, there needs to be research on this. I think this will work, but I think we need to really start doing this and checking, does it work? Second, urge parents and kids to delay social media until high school. Raise your hand, first of all, raise your hand if you have kids under 16. Raise your hand. Okay, just those of you, how many of you you're glad that your kids have social media, you're glad it was invented, you're glad that your kids have it? Raise your hand. One. Okay. Why did you let your kids get social media? Because everyone else has it, Mom, right? We're all trapped. We're all trapped in a game. It's a commons dilemma in which we're trapped by what everyone else is doing. And it feeds down. My daughter is in 5th grade. All the girls now have Snapchat. Not Snapchat. That's much better. All the girls have Instagram because they make no effort to keep people off. So what we have to do is set a norm. It can't just be up to the individual parent. Principals, school districts have to set a norm, at least saying, parents, please, this is disrupting everything we do. We are having trouble teaching your kids. Please, don't let them lie and get an account when they're under 13. In fact, don't let them get an account until they're in high school. Please, get this out of middle school. It's already so hard, especially for the girls. Number 3, if you want to educate for wisdom, you've got to expose kids to multiple views. Don't run from them. Don't protect them from ideas that somebody says are unsafe. As Ruth Simmons, the first African-American president of an Ivy League school, she was wonderful about this. And after various protests and visiting speakers at Brown, she said, learning is the antithesis of comfort. The collision of views and ideologies is in the DNA of the academic enterprise. She understood anti-fragility. The mind is anti-fragile, wisdom is anti-fragile, intelligence is anti-fragile. You have to be exposed to things you don't like. You have to be exposed to things that challenge and try to disprove what you already believe. Socrates called himself the gadfly of Athens. He made people smarter. The best book ever written on the value of viewpoint diversity is On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, but it's kind of inaccessible to members of Gen Z. So I co-founded a group called Heterodox Academy, which is pushing to get more viewpoint diversity in universities, more viewpoint diversity among professors. And we produced a beautiful illustrated version of just Chapter 2 of On Liberty, reduced it by 50%. It's much more readable. So especially if you have any say over or suggestions for especially high school seniors should all read Chapter 2 of On Liberty. We make a free version available. It's much more accessible. I urge you to check that out. We also have created a program called Open Mind. Because college students are having such trouble talking across political lines, racial lines, other lines, we created a program that teaches them how to do it, that teaches anybody how to start a conversation. So go to openmindplatform.org. It's 5 modules, takes about 2 hours to do. You can work it into a semester course. You can work it into a single 2-hour session. We walk people through what the problem is, what's the psychology, motivated reasoning. People are stuck in their moral matrix, and we give them practice in starting conversations. So visit Open Mind Platform, it's free. 5th suggestion, give kids far more free play time. That is what they most need, especially in the younger grades, and give them far less supervision. Let them have conflicts, let them work it out. Now, bullying over multiple days is a different story, but we have such concept creep. My kids have learned that if someone insults them, that's bullying. If there's a conflict, that's bullying. No, that's childhood, which teaches you for adulthood. They have to have those conflicts. So much less supervision, much more free playtime. Let Grow, I co-founded with Lenore Skenazy a group called Let Grow, which has a lot of suggestions for parents and schools. Really simple thing, well, certainly kids need a lot more recess than we give them, but if they have their devices, they're just going to use their devices. So it has to be recess with no devices. And the simplest thing of all, keep the playgrounds open before and after school, because that's the one place that overprotective parents will allow their kid to play without them being there. So there's all kinds of suggestions. There's all kinds of ways we can give kids a lot more free play time, which is what they most need. And my final suggestion, please, whatever state you're in, if you know legislators, if you have any say in this, any way to suggest this, please pass a free-range parenting law. Follow Utah, which did it. At Let Grow, we also have a page of advice on this. Go Utah! Utah's putting you all to shame. A lot of parents, when I talk with parents, most parents don't want to be helicopter parents. Most parents want to at least try. Let the kid go out and run a little errand as they did. But we hear stories, it's not that common, but it happens often enough to scare the heck out of us. If an 8-year-old, an 8-year-old was caught walking a dog. And so now the parents weren't actually arrested, but the police showed up. What's going on? Why is your kid outside? If a kid goes to this, I created a little thing, I called it a free-range kids license, so that if my son is stopped, I would send them out at age of 8, it'll say, New York State gives significant latitude to parents to decide what's right, which is true. And it says, if you still don't believe me, please read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, then think about your own childhood, and if you still think you should stop me, then please call my parents and you'll see they have my permission. Okay. But I wouldn't need to do this if New York State would just pass a free-range parenting law so that parents have the right to decide what's right for their kids about independence. So that's my talk for you. I have said that we have a mental health crisis. This is not the usual cross-generational misunderstanding. This is a crisis which is affecting all of us. I've shown you evidence for 2 major causes, and I've given you 6 specific suggestions for things you can do. And look at this list. Yes, take photos of it. Devices are good for that. Take photos of it. And imagine if we did all 6, this is not just nibbling at the edges. This would be transformative for American childhood. This would give us stronger, wiser, tougher kids. So thank you. I now look forward to talking with Mark about this.
Please welcome K-12 Education Director of the Watson Family Foundation, Mark Sternberg.
They're not clapping for me.
Thanks. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you. And I'm excited to have a little time to ask some follow-up questions. Such a provocative set of ideas that you shared with us. And I think I especially want to thank you for not just the insights, but for your courage in articulating them, the care with which you've studied the questions, the humanity you bring to this discussion that is hard for everyone here, the humor you bring. I mean, this is hard for all of us. So to be able to laugh a little bit as we work our way through it is just so helpful. You've got a room full of activists, of policymakers, of politicians who confront it every day. You've got a room full of educators who confront it in the classroom. You've got a room full of parents as well. And I want to start. I want to start with parents, because that's maybe our most important common denominator in the room. My children, of course, are perfect. When I walk home, the scene in the Sternberg house is that my son has self-regulated. His screen is put away already, and he leaps to his feet to greet me. It's rather fabulous.
No, seriously.
No, seriously. We all struggle with this. So I think we'd all like to hear a little bit more of your counsel around screens and to sort of for some parsing, because you're not saying the screens are the cause necessarily. Are they causal or are they symptomatic?
Yeah. Right. So first, let me be clear. The internet does many wonderful things and many bad things, and the wonderful stuff, I think, vastly outweighs the bad things. This is not about the internet. iPhones, devices, iPads do many wonderful things. And the problem isn't screen time per se, except that screen time crowds out playtime. That is a problem. The specific problem is social media, especially social media in which there's communication that is being judged and commented on and rated by others. That's why Instagram, Facebook are two of the main offenders. I don't know enough about TikTok and how that's all going to play out. So it's social media specifically. I think so I've come up with 3 simple rules. I had a debate with Nir Ayal, who has a book called Hooked and another one called Indistractable. I had a debate with him, but even though he's on the other side of this, we actually raise our kids the same way, and we came up with 3 simple principles. Rule number 1, all screens, all devices out of the bedroom by a fixed time every night. That's just the rule. There's no reason kids, especially teenagers, should be having a device in their bedroom, or they'll be checking overnight, and that's terrible. They need sleep. Rule number 2, no social media till high school, as I said. And rule 3, work out a time budget with your kid, because from a distance, Gen Z, this is a great thing about Gen Z, they are totally not in denial. You talk to them about it, they know this is a serious problem. And so when you talk to kids, they'll often be pretty reasonable about it, like, yeah, you're right, let's maybe 2 hours a day.
And rule followers.
It's what?
They tend to follow rules.
Yeah, they actually are more, yeah. So work out a time budget, keeping in mind all the other things that the kid agrees would be good for him or her to do. And so have that discussion, because how many of you otherwise, it's like you walk into the kid's room and you see the shuffle like that, and you say, were you just on your phone? No, Mom, I wasn't. I was, and that's that constant struggle.
That never happens in my house.
That's what you got to end. So 3 simple rules would do it. Yeah, that's for screens. Other parenting advice? One thing I've learned is that this is especially hard on mothers, because they're the ones who are judged. If the father is letting the kid out, like, oh, he's toughening him, but mothers are really judged much more harshly. And so it's very hard to do this as an individual mother. It really helps to have a community. And so go to letgrow.org. You'll find other people in your neighborhood. If you have a group, the kids go play together. They go out on errands together. Then everyone's happy.
I have another parent in my children's school community runs a mental health practice. And she says that she cannot hire therapists fast enough, and she cannot rent space quickly enough to keep up with the demand that the devastating demand for these services that you write so eloquently about, that I think is maybe at the same time to the people in this room and to your broader audience, both devastating and not surprising.
Right. That's right. So it's the same thing we see on campus, exactly the same thing. We can't hire therapists fast enough, and even if we could, we have no buildings to put them in. There's just, the need is too great. If you have a doubling or tripling of demand in the space of just a few years, what are you going to do? And so I think, so what a lot of colleges are doing is they're giving wellness courses. They're teaching them how to meditate and things like that. But that's trying to, fix the problem after it's begun. What they don't do is try to help them become strong themselves. And so it's hard to do this in college. I spoke at my old high school in Scarsdale, and the principal said, by the time we get them in 9th grade, it's already too late. They've already deep in these habits. So this needs to start in K6. Basically, kids are anti-fragile, and if we treat them as they're fragile all the way through adolescence, there's a possibility that they may be damaged for life.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to move from a conversation as a parent and as parents to to campus. And maybe you can talk as a segue about why you wrote this book, The Uncobbling.
Sure.
Like what did you start to see that led to sort of an instinct that this article, then the book, needed to be written?
Yeah. So the whole idea came from Greg. He's the one who first diagnosed it. Greg suffers from depression. He nearly committed suicide in 2007. And when he was released from the hospital, he learned cognitive behavioral therapy, in which you learn to recognize cognitive distortions. And he runs the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. They push for free speech rights for college students. And all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, in 2013, 2014, he heard college students doing the exact same distortions that he had learned to stop doing about campus speakers. So wait, you mean like a conservative is coming to speak, or a provocateur, or somebody that somebody objects to, and you don't have to go to the talk, and you're in danger? What do you mean you need a safe space? What does that even mean? So we were all totally puzzled. And so it came out of nowhere in 2014 or so. And Greg thought, somehow colleges are teaching students to do these distortions. What are we doing wrong? So we wrote this article in The Atlantic, and then things got so much worse on campus with safe spaces, trigger warnings, constant conflict over words, not even ideas, words, individual words. So we decided to expand this into a book. We did a lot more research, and one thing we learned is that we were wrong in thinking college was causing it. Rather, what happened is Gen Z showed up on campus around 2014, and that's why it seemed like it came out of nowhere. So it turns out, we're making it worse in a lot of ways, but by the time they went through K-12, it was already baked in.
This is an important insight, because I think there is, absent this insight, there is a leap to be made from your argument about anti-fragility at home to the dynamics that are playing out on campus.
The campus protests, yes, that's true. That's true. So let me be clear. The wave of protests that swept campuses in 2015, a lot of them began as protests against racism, various kinds of prejudice, and I'm not in any way saying that is because the protesters were coddled as kids. It's two separate threads. What's going on here is we have, and we trace this out in the book, we have a rising culture war in the country, left versus right. We have, at the same time, the professoriate and the universities are moving left and purifying. So you now have a very firmly left-leaning space on progressive campuses in which certain ideas become much more intense. And these are certain ideas around power, privilege, race. And so you have a whole set of ideas that has nothing to do with coddling or overprotection. It has origins in certain political views. And as many institutions are polarizing and becoming more political on the right and the left, there was more fertile ground for these more combative views. And so it's only at the most progressive universities that you get these big protests and meltdowns. Our argument is that the argument that this is a dangerous place, that Yale or Middlebury or these very progressive universities are dangerous, threatening places, suddenly seems right to lots and lots of white kids, lots of kids of all races, if they are already anxious and fragile. They see threats everywhere. So even though crime is going down, racism is going down, in most ways life is getting better, certain exceptions to those trends, but in general life is getting better, but yet it often seems to young people who are immersed only in social media, who are immersed in constant evidence that they're in danger. So the two intersect on campus, but it's two separate threads.
So how does the campus administrator, the leader on campus, be more like Ruth Simmons and defend?
So that's right. So this is something we should have emphasized more in the book. We live now in a time of moral chaos. There was, when you have an overarching culture, when you have a dominant culture, it gives a kind of order, kind of like a pax romana. And in the 20th century, we had WASP culture was the dominant culture. And as far as world cultures go, it was actually pretty open and welcoming. So the Jewish immigrant story is one, like my parents, they wanted to be like that, and they couldn't join the certain country clubs, but otherwise it was a wide open country. My wife's Korean American, same thing. Mm-hmm. And so when you have a dominant order, you have some sort of moral order, and then there's room for subcultures within. But part of what's happened, I believe, is as we've lost any sense of dominant culture, and we now have social media, we have complete moral chaos. And we have constant combat within every institution for who gets to dominate and impose their moral order. And so what happens at the most progressive universities, now it's happening in the most progressive companies, and even in some of the most progressive religions, you have a move to put in a moral order which you can call wokeness, is one word for it, a sort of a woke view, which is seeing everything in terms of power and privilege. And that's great on truth number 3. Life is a battle between good people and evil people, actually between good groups and bad groups. And so when activists make a bid to say this is what Yale is a white supremacist institution, for example. And if the president doesn't say, no, it's not, show me evidence, if rather the president says, okay, I can't meet all of your demands, but I'll meet as many as I can. When the president of Yale does that, then that becomes the dominant culture now. And then it's very hard to have an open speech climate. It's very hard to do the work of the academy. Yeah. And so Ruth Simmons had the guts to say, I think it was, what's his name, David? There was a right-wing critic in the 90s. Ruth Simmons had the guts to say, no, that is not what we do here. There have been only 2 or 3 presidents who've done that. The president of Chicago, Robert Zimmer. There are a few presidents who have really stood up for academic values and said, no, this is who we are. So it's vital. Leadership is vital, and part of leadership is asserting a moral narrative that keeps front and center the telos or purpose of your institution and your sacred values. Keep that front and center. Otherwise, it's going to be swept away by a different moral narrative.
Easier said than done.
Well, it turns out it's actually not that hard, because the few places where presidents have done it, the protesters just go home. So Marvin Krisloff at Oberlin, of all places, when the students came in and gave him their ultimatum, he said, oh, this is an ultimatum? Well, then my answer is no. That's not the way we do things here. Come talk to me next week. I'd be very happy to talk to me. And he did something that the president at Yale didn't do, which is Krisloff said, and you have attacked and criticized members of my staff that are doing their job and working hard to do their job. This was inappropriate. He stood up for members of his faculty and staff who were attacked. And so all he had to do, and so in the 3 cases or so that I know of where a president did that, the protesters just went home.
You and I have talked a little bit in preparation for today, and I've shared with you that I have colleagues and friends who are teaching on campus, including yours, who are afraid.
Who are afraid?
Who are afraid.
Yes. Yeah, I am too. I can speak my mind fairly well here because there is no mechanism by which you can report me. The First Amendment protects my right. I'm not going to be arrested. And there are not signs in the bathroom telling you what to do if I offend you. Whereas at NYU, as at many other universities, NYU is not special here. At many of the top schools, we have a bias response team. And it's a way in which certain offices at the university encourage students to anonymously report speech crimes. And what does this do? This means I don't say anything controversial when I teach.
Which Ruth and Nietzsche would argue makes us that much further away from actual learning.
That's right, because again, it's a commons problem. Each individual professor can't stick his or her neck out. But if it's a norm, if the leadership were to say, no, this is what we're about, and professors should be provocative, and no, if you're offended by something, go talk to the person, but we're not going to give you an anonymous reporting mechanism. We already have that. Of course, we have that for sexual harassment, for racism. We have reporting mechanisms for things that are against the law. Yeah. But what's a bias response team is if you perceive someone was biased, undefined, you report them.
Many of the policymakers here, we are appropriators and architects of higher ed. This is a conversation this week about primary and secondary school. So let's migrate into K-12. What is your counsel to a middle school assistant principal or a high school educator?
So it seems like the world is going crazy, and many people feel like they're walking on eggshells, and things are explosive, and you never know what's going to blow up on social media. But here's the encouraging thing. The great majority of people are actually very reasonable. The great majority of students are very reasonable. If you talk to people privately, you'll find that most Americans are very reasonable people. The change in the media environment and the increase in the culture war means that people on the extremes are the ones that we hear and see, and they are now very powerful. They're much more powerful than they were 10 years ago. So we're all afraid of a few people. And that puts us in the same condition that held in the communist countries, in which very few people bought into this nonsense, but they were afraid to speak honestly. So that's called preference falsification. And when most people are not being honest about what they think about something, then all kinds of bizarre things happen. So it's very difficult to stick your neck out as an individual, but if you talk to people behind the scenes, I think big public discussions are almost doomed to fail. They're terrible things now. But talk to people behind the scenes, see if you can build a bipartisan set of parents and educators who are concerned about this. I think we are now seeing, and we talked about this, there's what some research has called the Great Awakening, happened in 2014. There's evidence that white people on the left shifted radically to the left in 2014 on a lot of survey questions in the General Social Survey. So in some ways, you could say the Republicans shifted to the right in the 90s and with Fox News, but I think social media has affected many people on the left. They've shifted far left just in the last few years in ways that President Obama has actually been talking about recently and saying this is not good for the Democrats. So there was that shift recently. I think we're now seeing, in a sense, the beginnings of the counter-awakening. The New York Times just put out a video parody of cancel culture from the 13th century, and they're making fun of all the things from wokeness. And so if the New York Times is putting this out, and George Packer wrote an amazing article in The Atlantic on when the culture war comes from the kids. So if icons of the left are now saying, whoa, this wokeness stuff, this is making it impossible for us to educate kids, it's impossible to do our job, there could be a counter-awakening happening. And so to get back to your question, I think it's now clear that most people, certainly center left, center right, center, are actually pretty reasonable and could be brought together to be a force for positive change.
Help us draw the connection, and you just started to, between what is happening in our politics and the arguments around anti-fragility.
So what's happening in our politics? So one of the threads we talk about is the rise in cross-partisan hatred. And it used to be, as some people in this room know well, that when there's an election and your side loses, you say, okay, that's the rules of the game, and in 4 years we'll try it again. But as Pew surveys shows, as more and more people on both sides think that the other side is an existential threat to the country, and I'm afraid of them and angry at them, now every election is a matter of life and death. And if it's that serious, then the ends justify the means. And once we cross over into the ends justify the means, then democracy is dead. You can't have procedural rule of law if people think it's okay to lie, cheat, use violence, threats, and intimidation. So we have a rising polarization that has made everything more intense, and that destroys our norms, our normal American norms of decency and civility and our ability to talk with people across party lines. So I think that our politics, our rising political polarization, as I said in the Atlantic article, which is greatly fueled by the rise of social media, especially Twitter and Facebook and a few others. So all these problems are interconnected. It's a very hard problem. But my God, if we don't fix the education problem, if we keep turning out a generation that is anxious, that has not learned the skills of democracy, all the things that Alexis de Tocqueville praised about Americans, that we have these arts of association, he said. Gen Z doesn't have the art of association. They don't know how to work out a conflict without reporting it to the bias response team. So we've got, we've got to fix our politics in a lot of ways, but man, we have to begin educating for democracy. Because my fear is that many members of Gen Z, look, we all messed it up. Gen Z bears no blame for what's happened. But we are now producing a generation that will find it even harder to handle a democracy.
So you sounded a hopeful note a moment ago, that you...
Within a larger symphony of discord and pessimism, yes.
But this idea that there may be kind of a reaction that's beginning that brings us back to a sensible center, and these folks depend on that sensible center.
Yeah.
I mean, to do their jobs, to pass laws, that As you said in your very first comment, it has gotten harder, not easier. And I think part of what we appreciate about your insight is you're diagnosing why. Yeah. But now you're predicting, maybe, or seeing the beginning of a renaissance, and maybe you could talk a little more about it.
Yes. So actually, in the last chapter of the book, you will see we do talk about some green shoots. There are some really encouraging trends. And so I'll give you one that I haven't mentioned. Just especially since the 2016 election, and then the rise of actual Nazis. Like, whoever thought we'd see like Nazis marching in the street? So now that we have this like far-right white identity politics, a lot of intellectuals who are not white men are now writing and saying, whoa, this whole identity politics thing that we're doing, this has to change. And so there's, I have a whole page of them, like Amy Chua's book, Francis Fukuyama, there are a number of, John McWhorter, there are a lot of African-American professors who are writing about this. The Dalai Lama has been tweeting about this.
Wait, so the Dalai Lama tweets?
He does, yes, he tweets, you should follow him. So again, here's my point. That there are, most people are reasonable, most people of every race and group are reasonable, and they're beginning to stand up. And so I think your job is to be part of that. And the way you stand up is quietly, gently, with incredible social skill, build a coalition, never accuse people on the other side. In fact, here's my watchword, here's like my campaign or my slogan for the next 50 years. We have a lot of social problems. We can't solve them as long as we're moralizing them, as long as we're locked into the good versus evil game. You can't solve them. So here's what we need to do. Demoralize it and empiricize it. So every company is now struggling with diversity and inclusion issues. Nobody knows what to do. There is no form of diversity training that has been shown to work. I think it's because it's been conducted in a realm of fairly politicized hopes and dreams. We need to actually strip out the morality. It's not about good and evil. Just be a social psychologist. We have complex social problems. Strip out the morality, and then try things and collect data. What works?
Okay, so great idea, easier said than done.
As individuals, sure, it's hard to run large controlled experiments as an individual, but as a school district, you can do it. Mm-hmm. Anybody, raise your hand if you have any influence over a school district here. Raise your hand. Okay, so something as simple as have half the schools at different levels have a no cell phone policy during the day and half not, and then look and see if you can measure all kinds of measures of student engagement and learning. So you could do that. All schools are doing things about diversity and inclusion, like implicit bias training, which hasn't been shown to work. So try other things. Do different diversity things in different schools and try it. The experimental method is actually not that hard.
And are you available to advise and support as we try these things?
Well, actually, maybe, in the sense that I'm putting together, so in the corporate world, this is a big problem, and I'm actually working with some companies to try to...
We'll talk about this a little bit, because we've talked about parents, we've talked about schools, we've talked about policymakers, and now you're suggesting, here's what's next.
So just as in 2015, this problem came flooding at us, leaders had no idea what to do, they rarely stood up for principles, they mostly gave in. Well, Gen Z just began graduating in May of 2018. They've just entered the corporate world. Mm-hmm. And we were going to put a chapter in the book on coddling at work, but there wasn't enough evidence back in 2017 when we were writing. Well, now there is. So if you talk to business people now, they say things like, it's like, these are direct quotes, some of my new employees, it's like they come in looking for conflict. Or it's like these young employees, if a light bulb burns out, they won't change it. They'll wait until someone tells them to change it. And so in a variety of ways, a lot of the problems we're seeing with Gen Z as they go into the work world. Oh, the other thing is, it's like all of our time now is spent because somebody said something. And it becomes, each week there's a blow up and we spend so much time now on conflicts over somebody said something. So, at a university, if there's these conflicts, the university is not going to fail. It's not going to disappear. But especially in a small company, it will actually fail. And so it's urgent that companies work out an approach to this. So I think you might say the coddling is sort of coming for corporate America.
Yeah.
And business people are going to have to figure out what to do. And so that's what I'm trying to help them with.
My children leap up to change the light bulb. It's amazing. You should see it. Hey, everybody, please join me in thanking Jonathan for today.